Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we have a very special guest, Jairam Ramesh, former Union Minister and presently member of Rajya Sabha, who has just released a book just a few days ago on India's economic reforms of 1991, seminal decisions that were taken in a space of 3 months, the big decisions. And the book is called To the Brink and Back, India's 1991 story. So we will talk to Jairam about how reforms were done during that period. In fact, that period is recognized by many as a period when the 1991 reforms, which really set the tone for India's integration with the global economy and all the big decisions that happened there. Welcome to our show, Jairam.
Thank you.
So your book, I just went through it and I found some very interesting observations that you've made in the book. One is that all along, even within the Congress, there was opposition to what was being done, and it was probably Narasimha Rao's and Manmohan Singh's tactfulness, or whatever you may call it, that and with support from people like you in the back room, that a lot of things got pushed. New industrial policy, opening of trade, and there's a chapter on devaluation, the two-stroke devaluation. And you also say that after the first stroke devaluation, there was opposition again from senior leaders like...
No, opposition from the Prime Minister himself. Who didn't want the second devaluation.
Yeah. And you also indicate that the second was done somewhat by stealth.
Second was, between Dr. Manmohan Singh and Dr. Rangarajan. So they sort of masterminded the second.
You say morning 9 o'clock it was done and
I mean, the Prime Minister didn't want... the Prime Minister didn't want devaluation per se. It was very difficult to persuade him to accept devaluation. He accepted a two-step devaluation on the advice of his Finance Minister. After the first devaluation, on the 1st of July, he developed cold feet. And, he was getting a lot of feedback, including from the President of India at that time, Mr. Venkatraman, who had advised him against devaluation. So he tried his best to stop the second devaluation on the 3rd of July.
So what was the problem?
Remember, devaluation has a long history.
Yeah, sure.
The 1966 devaluation.
You mentioned the Indira Gandhi devaluation, which was...
The 1966 devaluation.
Which people were recalling
that was
as a negative...
politically very controversial. There was a certain promise of foreign investment and foreign aid that did not materialize because of our political stance. And the general political verdict was that the 66 devaluation was a political disaster, was an economic disaster. Although subsequently, as I have quoted in my book, there were scholars like Bhagwati and Srinivasan who have written that devaluation was not that much, may have been a political, politically controversial, but from an economic point of view, was not half as bad as it is made out to be. So the long shadow, the word devaluation, whether it's in India, whether it's in UK, whether it's in China now, the word devaluation conjures up negative images.
In a sense,
exchange rate is seen to be a matter of pride.
National pride. Yeah.
National pride. But actually, exchange rate is a price. It's a price of a domestic currency vis-a-vis the international currency. In this case, happens to be the dollar.
But tell me, Jairam, now we see the politicization of currency adjustment, exchange rate adjustment. During that
By the way, Dr. Manmohan Singh never used the word devaluation. They always used to use the word exchange rate adjustment. And you always use the word market market determined exchange rate.
In some ways, Jairam, even today, we are facing a similar situation. China has devalued, and there is a debate within among the policymakers in this government on whether we should have a strong exchange rate, or how much should we devalue, or whether should we devalue.
No, I think, you see, by 1993, we had moved from a managed exchange rate regime to a virtually a market determined.
But even today we have a managed float, right?
Yeah,
we don't have a free exchange.
It's but I would say, I wouldn't say completely free, but it's not half as controlled as it is made out to be. So it is market determined, and you're finding because it is market determined, there is a steady depreciation that has taken place of the Indian rupee.
But that sentiment still remains today. That exchange rate as a reflection of national machismo, national pride.
Yeah, that's there. After all, remember, the Prime Minister in his election campaign said that when the rupee was depreciating, in the early months of 2014, he said, we'll take it up to 40 to the dollar. Well, actually, it's come down. It's going to hit 70 to the dollar. So, there is in politics a feeling that, in exchange, 1 rupee should be equal to $1.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate in nationalism.
In fact, when Modi came to power, somebody said, one of Modi's key supporters, I think Shri Ramesh said that we are moving to 40 rupees to $1.
I remember that 40 figure. Yeah, 40 in Parliament also it got mentioned during the debate, and I remember arguing with my colleagues, my friends in the BJP, that I think they shouldn't make such a big thing out of the exchange rate, because ultimately exchange rate reflects market fundamentals between the supply and demand of dollars.
But here with this regime, it probably also part of the Hindutva pride to have a stronger exchange rate.
In 1991, Mr. Narasimha Rao had that same feeling, you see. Nikhil Chakravarti, Arjun Sen Gupta.
You had a lot of economists who didn't want...
35 economists gave out a statement. I've given a copy of that statement in the book.
Even your chief economic advisor was
opposed to it.
SP Shukla was opposed to it.
Finance secretary, the foreign secretary, Mr. Muchkund Dubey. Everybody. The big economists, Professor Hanumant Rao, I.S. Gulati, 35 leading economists gave a statement, which I have reproduced in the book.
So your book clearly says it was not easy. You really had to push the envelope on a day-to-day basis?
See, for Mr. Narasimha Rao, economic reforms were a matter of compulsion. For Dr. Manmohan Singh, it was a matter of conviction at that point of time. But ultimately, remember, Dr. Manmohan Singh was only the finance minister. He couldn't have done what he did without prime ministerial support, prime minister's political astuteness, craftiness, backing. Now, it's so, luckily for us, we had a crisis. Luckily for us, we had a prospect for a default. Luckily for us, our foreign exchange reserves had come down to less than a week's level of import cover. So that forced the Prime Minister to listen to his finance minister and actually take on the cause of economic reforms much more decisively than he would have done under normal circumstances.
Okay. But in spite of that, Jairam, your book says very clearly that when the first budget came, just after the new industrial policy was announced. Now, there's a history to the industrial policy also, where you clearly say that everybody, even within the Congress, senior Congress leaders,
not only within the Congress,
was saying that you are junking the old Nehruvian...
Yeah, but not only the Congress, it's also the left, it's also the BJP, and large sections of Indian industry
who
were very, very ambivalent on these reforms.
You mentioned C.K. Birla of FICCI, and even Anand Mahindra.
A lot of people
argued that you should first make
internal liberalization first, external liberalization later, and this whole approach to foreign investment. Rahul Bajaj and company, the Bombay Club that came about subsequently. So don't forget that even in Indian industry, it was not completely 3 cheers for economic reforms. It was 1.5 cheers, because they were ambivalent about the reduction in import duties. They were deeply suspicious about foreign investment. But as I said, it got done. It got done because of the shadow of a default.
It's curious that the same argument is being made today in the context of say, foreign investment in retail, for instance. The local retail industry says you must first strengthen the local... This is what BJP's argument is.
Well, multi-brand retail...
First strengthen local multi-brand retail industry, and then you bring in foreign investment. So, in some sense, shadows of those arguments are being seen today in a different context.
I don't think you can equate FDI in manufacturing with FDI in multi-brand retail. I myself, I don't fight shy of saying I myself am not a gung-ho supporter of FDI in multi-brand retail. Although it was a decision taken by the government and I supported it, there are arguments for it, but there are also deep arguments against it.
But what about the public sector as a whole, and retaining the public sector character of, say, Indian banks and many companies?
Well, I am certainly
they still remain today, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think
that has not been reversed.
No. I don't think.
And this was a debate during your time also.
Mr. Narasimha Rao was very clear, and I have reproduced a paper that he wrote in 2001 for the Congress plenary session called Liberalization in the Public Sector.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to him, and I reproduced that conversation. He was deeply, deeply angry at the Arun Shourie type of privatization that was being attempted during Mr. Vajpayee's time. Privatization of VSNL, privatization of Balco, privatization of large properties of the ITDC. So actually, in Mr. Narasimha Rao's scheme of things, in economic reforms, liberalization, yes. Globalization, yes. Privatization, no.
Okay.
I mean,
so that was an article of faith.
It was an article of faith. And even today, I can confidently say that, for the Congress Party, the Congress Party has embraced liberalization. It has embraced globalization, but it can never embrace privatization of the type Mr. Arun Shourie advocated.
But in some sense, the NDA now is following more Congress's approach
than
Vajpayee's approach.
I don't know, because the subtext of the banking reforms, the Indradhanush, the 7-point reforms, the subtext which I have read seems to be that we are moving in the direction of privatization of banks.
Okay.
And that is a complete non-starter as far as the Congress Party is concerned.
Why do you say a subtext as in inviting foreign investment?
We are starting... We want to
bringing government stake below 50% in public sector banks?
That seems to be the ultimate objective. Okay. And, I read in some newspapers reports attributed to senior officials of the Department of Financial Services that the ultimate objective really is to reduce government equity below 50%.
But wasn't that attempted by the UPA too? At least there was a debate whether government stake in public sector banks should be brought down below 50%.
No, never. That debate was never there.
Okay.
Disinvestment, yes. But bringing government stake in bank, particularly in the financial sector, certainly not. And Dr. Manmohan Singh himself, in fact, Dr. Manmohan Singh's model of globalization in 1991, which, by the way, saved us in 1998 at the time of the East Asian crisis, was fiscal prudence, was financial prudence, both domestically and internationally. Even today, we are not convertible on the capital account, and thank God for that. We are convertible only on the trade account.
On the trade account. Yeah, we will come back to this subject, but after a small break, please don't go away and keep watching RSTV. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are talking to Jairam Ramesh, former Union Minister. Jairam, the other thing that is very interesting in your book is, which you emphasize, is how do you communicate reforms? Like you said, devaluation was a bad word, so Manmohan Singh always used the word currency adjustment. and in the industrial policy, in the new industrial policy, you had to then write a preamble because the initial draft was rejected by senior Congress leaders, and you had to say that this is an evolutionary industrial policy, and it flows from 1956. It flows from this industrial policy of the 60s, 70s, invoking Indira Gandhi.
Continuity with change.
Continuity with change. Narasimha Rao's famous term, continuity with change. Also invoking Indira Gandhi's observation that productivity improvement is a must, and the private sector should be brought in. Now tell me about communication. What is the...
How do you do a U-turn without making it appear to be a U-turn?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the essence of
but in a way, Jairam, that is also, that's also been described as reforms by stealth. A lot of economists say that you should not do reforms by stealth.
No, it's not reforms. See, it's easy for economists to sit on the sidelines and pontificate on how to do the reforms. It's actually when you are in the hot spot, when you're in the firing line, that you really are faced with the challenge of how do you package the reforms, how do you communicate the reforms. And I think Mr. Narasimha Rao particularly proved politically very astute, very cunning, very, very adroit. And I think this was a jugalbandi. The economic wisdom and sagacity of Dr. Manmohan Singh and the political craftiness and political manipulation of, in a good sense, of Mr. Narasimha Rao. Because remember, he had to navigate it through his own party. First, he had to navigate it through his own government. He had to navigate it through his party. He had to navigate it in Parliament. He had to navigate it in the media, with industry, and so on and so forth.
But tell me, Jairam,
his own Minister of State of Industry, who is now the Deputy Chairman of the Rajya Sabha, was against the industrial policy reforms.
Sure.
And ultimately, the last laugh was with the Prime Minister. He forced Mr. P.J. Kurian to lay on the table of the House the industrial policy reforms. And I remember Mr. Kurian saying, I'm doing something which my heart is not into it at all. But he did it.
But tell me, Jairam, to be objective, there is a consensus that the first phase of reforms, which actually much of it happened in these 90 days that you mentioned.
Actually, not even 90. It is between the 21st of June, 91, and 24th of July, 91. 33 days.
No, I'm making a different one. That was many people say there's a consensus that was, in some sense, the easy part, low-hanging fruits. Now, towards the end of Narasimha Rao's tenure and towards and then in the UPA tenure also, especially the last 3 years of UPA 2, what happened to communication? Communication was missing. You were not able to convey what exactly.
Well, I don't want to compare Mr. Narasimha Rao's regime with either Mr. Vajpayee or
I'm on the broader point of communicating critical reforms.
It's not just communication. It's the packaging.
It's a problem with this government also.
It's managing the politics of the reforms.
Yeah.
It's the packaging of the reforms. It's the articulation of what you want to do. It's allowing people to have their say. For 5 consecutive days, Mr. Narasimha Rao called a meeting of the Congress Parliamentary Committee, Congress Parliamentary Party, almost 300 MPs, and who criticized the budget, who criticized the industrial policy reforms, and you will be surprised there were only 2 people who supported Dr. Manmohan Singh. Only 2 people. Prime Minister kept quiet. And Dr. Manmohan Singh was under attack from everybody except 2 people, Nathuram Mirza from Rajasthan, and you won't believe this, Manishankar Iyer, who was the only person who stood up and defended Dr. Manmohan Singh. But, that was a way over 5 days of allowing MPs to vent their spleen, to let off their steam.
But what happened to these processes, say, in the last 3 years of UPA 2?
Well, but you're right. The nature of the reforms being what they were, the political circumstances being what they were later on, I think changed. But the important point is that after 96, you had Deve Gowda, you had Mr. Gujral, you had Mr. Vajpayee, of course you had Dr. Manmohan Singh himself, and then now you have Mr. Modi. But the broad direction of economic policy has remained the same. I mean, there may be nuances here and there, but the broad direction of economic policy as laid out in those 33 days, a new fiscal policy, a new trade policy, and a new industrial policy has remained, the essentials have remained the same. And we have not gone back in time,
but
even though
so what about today?
We faced crisis from time to time.
But today, do you feel there's a consensus on, say, critical reforms like GST or the
on
land?
GST there is.
Huh?
On GST there is.
Land acquisition?
On GST there is. On land acquisition there isn't. On GST there is. I don't think
on labour reforms?
I don't think that there is a consensus on labour reforms. I don't think there is a consensus on financial sector. There is a consensus on the financial sector reforms if that means strengthening the financial sector, increasing financial inclusion, bringing banking to the unbanked. But if reforms means privatization of the existing 27 nationalized banks, then there is no consensus.
There is no consensus.
So it depends on what you see. This word reforms is a badly used word.
Yeah.
It's an abused word.
Much abused.
In fact, half of what gets done under the rubric of reforms is actually deforms, not reforms. So you have to say, what do you mean by reforms? And financial sector is a good example.
So that's where communication and packaging comes, right?
On GST, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind there is an across-the-board consensus.
Then what is the problem?
No, I mean, the problem is in the mechanics of it. If you're going to have a GST at 27% or 28%, that's a recipe for disaster. Remember, an indirect tax is a retrogressive tax. It's not a progressive tax. GST is an indirect tax. So you want to have an indirect tax which settles at
so Congress would be satisfied with 18%?
18 to 20. We have suggested 18%. A maximum of 18%. But, it could be
but then
18 to 20%.
18% would entail bringing liquor and petroleum into the GST net?
Over a period of time. As it is, petroleum products are not going to come immediately. Petroleum products are going to come at a time to be determined by the GST Council.
What about liquor? Is a big generator of
difficult. It's difficult. I mean,
black money?
I don't see. Yeah, I mean, you can clean up the politics of India if you bring liquor under GST.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I don't see the politics, the political economy. I have to admit, speaking not as a political figure, but speaking as somebody from the outside, who's seen politics also as a scholar as well, I would say that it will be very difficult to get alcohol into the GST net. But nevertheless, I think a GST net that settles at about 18 to 20% will not only preserve international competitiveness, but it will also be good for domestic consumers.
Okay. Tell me, Jairam, how do you compare opposition, ruling party opposition relations today as compared to maybe 1991?
No comparison. No comparison. Today it's a disaster. Today the bitterness, there is poison, there is a lot of vituperative words exchanged. I mean, absolutely. In 91, there were political opposition. The left opposed the reforms. National Front opposed the reforms. Chandrasekhar opposed the reforms. VP Singh opposed the reforms. Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee opposed the reforms.
No confidence.
Jyoti Basu opposed the reforms. But there was camaraderie. Mr. Narasimha Rao met, and Dr. Manmohan Singh met each of the leaders individually. They met them collectively. They had debates in Parliament. There was a lot of sparring in Parliament, and I've reproduced some of the Parliament debates, which are not in the public domain. And you can see how Mr. Vajpayee attacked, how the left party, Somnath Chatterjee and others, how Mr. Yashwant Sinha attacked, Mr. Narasimha Rao. So, I mean...
But there was dialogue, which is missing today.
Today, dialogue is completely missing.
Well, why is it missing?
I think...
Is the opposition to blame or what?
No, my view is that the initiative has to come from the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister of the day. Why is it that the politics of India was competitive during Mr. Vajpayee's time, but it was not bitter? It was not poisonous. It was not vituperative, as it was during, like Mr. Narasimha Rao's time. There was competition, but there was no bitterness. But why is there so much bitterness and poison today? And I think the primary responsibility for this is that the Prime Minister has to be seen to be reaching out, has to be seen to be extending the hand of cooperation, has to be seen to be engaging with the opposition. And I think that's conspicuously missing.
So, is there what can the opposition do to draw him out? Do you think
it's not the job of the opposition? Mr. Pranab Mukherjee once told me that the job of the opposition is to oppose, expose and depose. Okay? That's what we have to do. Our job is not to run the government. Our job is to participate in the functioning of parliamentary democracy. Agreed. But the primary trigger, the primary spark has to come from the government of the day, which is headed by the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister does not take the initiative. If the Prime Minister becomes an absentee landlord as far as Parliament is concerned, then I'm afraid Parliament does not have much hope in this country.
There's another very interesting parallel that I see, Jairam, between what this government did and the mistake that your government made in 1991. This government also gave a 100-day roadmap.
By the way, that was the first and last.
Let me come to the question. 100-day roadmap, we'll bring black money back, he'll do this, you'll do that. And your government also gave a 100-day roadmap.
Thanks to Mr. Chidambaram.
Which Pranab Mukherjee opposed.
Yes. Everybody opposed. Mr. Chidambaram got his way through the 100-day thing. And it proved to be quite a millstone round our necks. And Dr. Manmohan Singh, on the 25th of June, created a huge controversy by saying that I can't roll back the prices, which was one of the things that was promised in the 100-day program. So the 100-day program for the Congress stopped in the 91 manifesto. No manifesto after that ever talked about 100
So how do you compare that with Modi's 100-day promises?
Mr. Pranab Mukherjee told me, he said, remember when you're writing a manifesto, you're writing it for a government for 5 years, not for 100 days.
So how do you see Narendra Modi's 100-day promise?
See, this 100-day thing came from FDR. The roots of the 100-day goes back to 1932.
Happy days are here
the New Deal and Roosevelt and so on. But, in our system, this 100 days... it's better. I think, I prefer the Narayan Murthy model, which is under-promise and overachieve, rather than over-promise and underachieve, which political parties are often prone to do.
Do you think this government has fallen into that trap of over-promising and
I think so. I think so. I think it's just huge all political parties over-promise, but this government came to power more than the quota of usual over-promises, which they have not been able to fulfill. On black money, for instance, on the revival of growth. I mean, we've seen growth fall from 7.5% to 7% in 1 quarter. I mean, I don't really think that economic growth can be reduced to a QSQT, quarter say, quarter tak type of a thing. But nevertheless, since if 7.5% had become 7.8%, the same finance minister would have been on all TV channels claiming vindication of his economic policy.
Yeah.
But I don't see the finance minister in the last 2 days commenting on the dip in the GDP growth from 7.5% to 7%.
Tell me one last question, Jairam. If Narasimha Rao were alive today and he was active Congress leader in Parliament, and if he were to meet Modi, what would he advise Modi?
I don't know. I mean,
given the present setting, yeah.
See, I think I don't know what the chemistry between the two would have been. I know that Mr. Rao and Mr. Vajpayee had a close bonding, and in fact, Mr. Rao sent Mr. Vajpayee.
How would Narasimha Rao would have assessed the situation, political economy situation today, and what would he have advised? One advice that he would have given him.
If Mr. Modi is not been able to take a leaf out of Mr. Vajpayee's book, it's highly unlikely that he's going to take a leaf out of Mr. Narasimha Rao's book.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jairam, for talking to us. That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks for watching.